The clinking of silver cutlery on royal Copenhagen porcelain was the only sound that broke the tense silence at our table. Around us at the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills, lively conversations and tinkling laughter rang out a symphony of the rich and beautiful. But in the small world of the Hayes family, the air was thick with unspoken things. My mother Beatrice, whose expensively maintained blonde hair and perfectly practiced smile were honed in front of a mirror, set down her mimosa. The diamonds on her hand flashed in the brilliant California sun. She leaned forward, her voice sweet as honey but laced with venom. "You know, Elara," she whispered, a smirk playing on her perfectly painted red lips. "You're lucky we still let you join us. Pity has its limits." The world around me seemed to fall silent. The restaurant's buzz faded away. I could feel the gaze of my father Harrison, who pretended to be engrossed in stock market reports on his phone, his silence a tacit agreement. I saw my brother Griffin, the golden heir, shift uncomfortably, not because of the cruelty of the words, but because of the public awkwardness. A seismic event was happening inside me. A tectonic shift of 35 years of repression. But on the outside, I remained a statue of calm. I slowly set my coffee cup down, feeling the cool porcelain on my fingertips. I looked up directly into my mother's eyes and smiled. Not a warm smile, but a cold, sharp one, like a shard of ice. "Thank you for your candor, Mother," I said, my voice unnervingly even. That night, in the quiet of my San Francisco penthouse, overlooking the bay, the cold rage I had suppressed for decades found its outlet. It wasn't a screaming storm, but a precise and methodical execution. With a few clicks, I dismantled the financial empire they had taken for granted. I had built the digital framework of their lives, and now I would pull it apart. Their Amex Centurion credit cards frozen. The automatic payments for the country club, the mortgages on the Beverly Hills house and the Napa estate cancelled. Access to the investment portfolio I had painstakingly built for them revoked. Finally, I composed a brief email to my lawyer instructing him to begin proceedings to sell the Napa estate, in which I had a partial ownership inherited from my grandmother. The digital guillotine had fallen. How had it come to this? The answer lay deep in the cool, terracotta-tiled hallways of our childhood home, a massive Spanish revival structure where affection was doled out as sparingly as water in a desert. Our home was a stage, and we were actors in the play of the Hayes family's perfection. The problem was I was always cast in the supporting roles. My achievements, valedictorian debate team, captain, a full scholarship to Stanford were acknowledged with indifferent nods, while Griffin's C in gym and a lucky home run in a baseball game were celebrated with extravagant dinners. "Griffin has charm," my mother used to say, "and you, Elara, you have intelligence. Know your place." My place was in the background, ensuring everything ran smoothly, an invisible brain in the family machine. Our wealth came from Hayes Properties, a commercial real estate empire my father had built with ruthlessness and foresight. He valued loyalty and results, but those standards didn't seem to apply to his son. When I received the Stanford scholarship, my father's first reaction was a frown. "We can afford to pay," he said, as if my financial independence was a personal insult to his success. Yet they happily paid for Griffin's exorbitant USC tuition, along with a BMW and an apartment in Marina del Rey. The greatest irony began after Griffin, in an attempt to prove himself a financial genius, evaporated $50,000 of my father's money on a failed biotech stock in a single afternoon. That night, my father called me. No apology, no acknowledgement of having ignored me for years. Just a command. "You need to manage the family's finances," he said. "Make sure he doesn't bankrupt us." And just like that, I was pulled in. I, the software developer with my little computer job, became the silent guardian of their wealth. I digitized their assets, automated their lives, created complex layers of security that only I understood. I managed everything from their utility bills to their multi-million-dollar trust funds. I was the enabler, the architect of their convenience, all while being treated like an overworked, unpaid IT staffer. They depended on the skills they derided. They needed the intelligence they never celebrated. That dependency had become my shackles, but I was wrong. It was never my shackle. It was my weapon. And at that brunch amidst the croissants and eggs, Benedict, my mother, in a moment of cruel arrogance, gave me the permission I never knew I needed. She said I was lucky they let me join them. They had mistaken my silence for submission. They had mistaken my competence for servitude. They were about to learn, in the most financially painful way, just how wrong they were. The next morning I woke not to an alarm but to an unusual silence. No automated email notifications from the financial systems I had created. No text messages from Griffin asking about a suspicious transaction. Nothing. For the first time in nearly a decade, my digital space was entirely my own. A deep, almost sacred stillness filled my apartment. The cold rage of the previous night had subsided, leaving a strange peace in its wake. I hadn't burned the bridge. I had methodically detonated it, clearing the path ahead. I made a cup of strong black coffee, walked to my floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out over a waking San Francisco. The fog was burning off the bay, revealing the sharp lines of the Golden Gate Bridge. The feeling wasn't triumph, nor was it regret. It was release. Yes. The burden of being the only adult in a family of indulged children had been lifted. The silence was broken at 10:17 a.m. It was Griffin. His caller ID flashed on my phone's screen, and I let it ring 3 times before answering, deliberately setting my coffee cup down. Elara. His voice was laced with confusion, not anger. Hey, weird thing. My Amex got declined at the parking garage. Can you look into it? Must be a glitch. I took a sip of coffee. There's no glitch, Griffin. A pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean? Did you check I need it to work? I have a lunch meeting at Spargo. I'm no longer managing those systems, I said, my tone as calm as a weather report. As I said, there's no glitch. There's a consequence. Consequence. His voice rose, an octave bewilderment starting to curdle into annoyance. Consequence for what? What the hell are you talking about? You'll have to figure that out for yourself, I replied. Or ask Mum and Dad. Good luck with your lunch. I hung up before he could respond. I knew exactly what would happen next. Like a perfectly arranged series of dominoes, one by one they would fall. 45 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Beatrice. I steeled myself for the hysteria. Elara! Her shriek pierced through the speaker, shrill and indignant. Do you have any idea the humiliation I just endured? My card was declined at the charity luncheon committee meeting in front of everyone. Florence Dupont looked at me like I was a pauper. Good morning, Mother, I said dryly. Don't you good morning me. What is going on? What did you do? I have resigned from my position as the family's unpaid financial administrator. I explained each word carefully chosen. You made it clear at brunch that my inclusion was an act of pity. I've decided to relieve you all of that burden. There was a dead silence. I could picture her face flushed with fury, her brain struggling to process a reality it wasn't programmed to understand the reality of my defiance. This is a stupid joke, Elara, she finally said, her voice dropping to a menacing hiss. Now fix it. Your father will hear about this. He will, I agreed, but not from you. Harrison's call came 2 hours later. His voice wasn't hysterical, it was ice cold. What the hell did you do? No greeting, no preamble. I did exactly what you trained me to do my entire life. I made a sound business decision based on the available data, I replied. The data indicated that my role in the family was no longer valued, so I eliminated the position. This isn't a game. You are the administrator of a system. Fix the damn system. His voice was that of a CEO speaking to an incompetent subordinate. I am no longer the administrator. As a professional courtesy, I have left a full set of documentation on the current status of all accounts and have forwarded them to my attorney, Julian Croft. He will pass them along to whomever you designate as my replacement. Attorney. The word seemed to stop him short. This was a language he understood. You've hired an attorney, of course. Like you, I believe in protecting my assets. All future communication on this matter should be directed through Mr. Croft's office. Are you threatening me, Elara? No, I said, staring out at the clear horizon. I'm setting a boundary. There's a difference. After I hung up with my father, I knew I had passed the point of no return. They had seen me as a utility, a function, a piece of software running in the background of their lives. Now the utility had been uninstalled, and they were staring at a blank screen. I spent the rest of the day writing code, with a focus I hadn't felt in years. There were no interruptions, no panicked calls, no family emergencies. It was pure, unadulterated efficiency. At 5 p.m. sharp, I made my final move. An automated email notification was sent to Harrison, Beatrice, and Griffin, as well as their family lawyer. Subject notice of ownership and intent to sell, Napa Estate, APN 407-1990-018. The body of the email was brief and legalistic. It informed them that as a co-owner with rights clearly defined in my grandmother's will, I had instructed my attorney to begin the process of partitioning and selling the property. It cited a clause I knew my father had overlooked in the will, one my shrewd grandmother had inserted to protect me, stipulating that any co-owner could force a sale if the property was not being used harmoniously and for the mutual benefit of all parties. This act wasn't just about money. It was an assault on the crown jewel of their portfolio, the symbol of the Hayes family's status and legacy. It was where they hosted lavish parties, charmed business partners, and staged their phony Christmas photos. I closed my laptop, feeling a cold finality. The game had changed. I was no longer the silent gatekeeper of their wealth. I was a competitor, and I knew their system inside and out. If my email about selling the Napa estate was a hand grenade, the reaction it caused was a nuclear explosion. The silence lasted for exactly 12 hours, an ominous calm before the storm. I used that time to fortify my defences. I changed all my personal passwords, enabled two-factor authentication on everything, and most importantly, I called Jordan Vance. Jordan wasn't just my best friend. He was a brilliant litigator who specialised in complex civil suits. "They're not going to take this lying down, Elle," he said after I explained the whole situation, his voice calm and professional over the phone. "Harrison will see this as a declaration of war. Be prepared for an all-out fight." "I know," I replied, looking around my minimalist apartment, a sanctuary of order and logic. "I've spent my life playing by their rules. Now I'm going to use the law." At 9 o'clock the next morning, the storm hit. It came not in the form of an angry phone call, but as a formal email from my father's law firm, Latham & Watkins, one of the biggest and most intimidating firms in the world. The email was a masterpiece of legally veiled intimidation. It accused me of breach of fiduciary duty, unlawful seizure of control over digital assets, and hinted at potential legal action for significant damages. It demanded that I immediately and unconditionally restore all access and cease and desist any attempts to liquidate joint assets. It completely ignored the fact that I was acting in response to their own treatment and my legal rights to the estate. This was Harrison's classic tactic: overwhelm, intimidate, use his massive financial power to crush any resistance. He had done it to business competitors and city planners. Now he was using it against his own daughter. I calmly forwarded the email to both Julian Croft and Jordan Vance with a simple note: as expected. Their response was almost immediate. Jordan called first. "Good," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "They've made their first mistake. They overreached. Breach of fiduciary duty requires a formal fiduciary relationship which I'm not sure existed, and their complete dismissal of your grandmother's testamentary rights makes them look petty. We can use this." Julian's call was similarly reassuring. "This is a show of force, Elara. Don't let it scare you. They're on shaky legal ground. Let us handle it." The war, however, wasn't just on the legal front. Beatrice launched a different offensive, one more subtle and perhaps more cruel. She began to weaponize her social network. The first call came from my Aunt Caroline, my mother's sister. "Elara, darling," she began, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Your mother called me. She's worried sick. She said you're going through some sort of difficult phase, that you're not yourself. What's going on, sweetie? You can tell me anything." The message was clear. I wasn't an adult exercising my legal rights. I was an unstable young woman having a meltdown. It was a blatant attempt to strip me of my agency and paint my act of defiance as a symptom of mental illness. "Thank you for your concern, Aunt Caroline," I replied coolly. "I'm doing just fine. In fact, I've never felt more like myself. I'm handling some family business matters. I hope you'll understand." I hung up, knowing my version would be ignored and my mother's narrative would be spreading through the country clubs and charity luncheons of Beverly Hills. Griffin, cut off from his financial lifeline, resorted to desperation. He showed up unannounced at my office building on the Embarcadero. Fortunately, I had anticipated this. I had alerted security, providing them with a photo and clear instructions that no member of my family was to be allowed up. I received a call from the front desk. "Ms. Hayes, there's a Griffin Hayes here to see you. He says it's a family emergency." "Thank you, Maria," I said. "Please inform him that I am unavailable and escort him from the building. If he refuses, please do not hesitate to call the police." I watched from my office window, looking down at the plaza below. 10 minutes later, I saw Griffin being escorted out the front doors by 2 large security guards. He looked confused and angry, his usual swagger gone. For the first time in his life, he couldn't use his name to open every door. A pang of guilt shot through me, but I crushed it. This wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. That night, I realized the true scope of what I had started. My family's assault was 3-pronged. My father's legal attack, my mother's social attack, and my brother's emotional attack. They were trying to isolate me, discredit me, and overwhelm me, but they had underestimated a crucial variable. They had spent years ignoring me, leaving me to my own devices in my world of logic and systems. They had inadvertently forged me into someone who could see past the chaos and emotion to the underlying mechanics. And I saw the mechanics of this fight clearly. They were playing chess by yelling. I was playing it by calculation. I opened a new encrypted file on my computer. I had spent years managing their accounts, seeing every transaction, every wire transfer, every clumsy attempt to hide expenditures. I had ignored it, chalking it up to the self-indulgence of the wealthy. Now it was ammunition. I began to build a timeline, a detailed financial inventory of Griffin's discretions, Beatrice's inflated charitable expenses, and a few of Harrison's questionable real estate deals that he thought no one noticed. I wouldn't use it as a threat. That wasn't my style. I would hold it in reserve, an unexploded bomb sitting silently in my digital arsenal, ready to be detonated if they pushed me too far. The war had just begun, but that night, in the silence of my apartment, I knew I was prepared. They might have the money and the status, but I had something more powerful. I had the truth. And I had the receipts. The following week unfolded in a series of calculated attacks and defences. Jordan Vance's office became my war room. The glass walls of his conference room were covered in flowcharts, legal timelines, and financial records. It looked like the strategy room for a hostile corporate takeover, which, in a way, it was. Harrison's legal team ramped up the pressure. They filed an emergency motion in court seeking a temporary restraining order to prevent me from taking any action regarding the Napa estate and to force me to return financial control. They painted a picture of me as a disgruntled daughter, acting irrationally and maliciously, causing irreparable harm to family stability. "They're trying to villainize you," Jordan said during one late-night strategy session. "They want the judge to see an emotional family squabble, not a legitimate business dispute. We're not going to let them." Our response was precise and cold. We didn't argue emotion. Instead, we filed a thick counter-motion filled with documentary evidence. We attached a copy of my grandmother's will with the property sale clause clearly highlighted. We included affidavits from real estate brokers confirming the estate's current market value and the clear financial benefit of selling it. And in a subtle but powerful move, we included a brief summary of the pro bono financial management services I had provided for nearly a decade, estimating the market value of those services in the high six figures. Our message to the judge was clear. This was not a tantrum. This was a business decision made by a competent co-owner who had been sidelined and taken for granted for too long. While the legal battle raged, Beatrice took her whisper campaign to the next level. She orchestrated an intervention. I was at home on a Tuesday evening reviewing some legal documents when my doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I saw not just Beatrice, but Aunt Caroline and Dr. Alastair Finch, our longtime family physician, a man I hadn't seen in 15 years. My heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but at their audacity. They were actually trying to stage a mental health play. I didn't open the door. Instead, I spoke through the intercom, my voice calm and clear. "Mother, Aunt Caroline, Dr. Finch, this is an unwelcome and entirely inappropriate ambush. Dr. Finch, I am not your patient, and your presence here is a serious ethical violation. You all need to leave immediately, or I will call the police for trespassing." I saw my mother recoil, shocked by the direct resistance. Dr. Finch looked acutely uncomfortable. Aunt Caroline started to say something about being concerned, but I cut her off. "I will not repeat myself. Leave now." I shut off the intercom and watched as they conferred awkwardly for a few moments before retreating to the elevator in defeat. The play had failed, but it showed me how far they were willing to go. Griffin, meanwhile, was starting to feel the real squeeze. Without his parents' credit card to fall back on, the reality of supporting himself for the first time was hitting him hard. He sent a series of text messages that devolved from angry to pleading. "Elara, come on. My landlord is threatening to evict me. I can't make my car insurance payment. They're going to cancel my policy. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry about everything. I'm sorry about brunch. Can you just fix things now I'm in real trouble?" This was the hardest part. A part of me, the part that had been programmed to take care of him, wanted to give in. But I knew that doing so would only continue the cycle. Turning the money faucet back on wouldn't help him. It would cripple him. I sent a single reply. "Griffin, I can't fix your life. Only you can. There are financial advisors and support groups that can help you learn to budget and manage your money. You're 37 years old. It's time." He didn't reply. The hearing for the temporary restraining order was on Friday. I attended with Jordan, dressed in a tailored charcoal grey suit, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I wanted to project professionalism and calm. Harrison and Beatrice were there with an army of lawyers. My father glared at me from across the courtroom, his eyes cold and filled with contempt. My mother refused to look at me, instead adopting a pained expression for the judge to see. The judge, an older woman named Eleanor Vance, did not look impressed by the drama. She had reviewed the filings from both sides. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her gavel echoing in the silent courtroom. "Aside from the emotional accusations, what is your legal basis for preventing your daughter from exercising rights clearly stipulated in your mother's will?" Harrison's lawyer launched into a long-winded argument about the intent of the will and family harmony. Judge Vance cut him off. Harmony appears to have left this particular ship long ago, Counselor. The will seems quite clear to me. She turned to me. Ms. Hayes, do you have anything to say? I stood. Your Honour, I would only say that this decision was not made lightly or with malice. It was made after years of consideration and is based on my legal rights and financial interests. I believe the documents we've submitted speak for themselves. The judge nodded. I have reviewed the submissions. The request for a temporary restraining order is denied. The matter of the property sale will proceed through the proper channels. As for the issue of financial control, it is clear that Ms. Hayes was acting as an informal agent. She has every right to resign from that role. Mr. Hayes, you will have to find a new financial manager. A small gasp escaped from my mother. Harrison's face was a mask of stone. We had won. It was a small victory, a skirmish, not the war, but it was significant. It validated my position and proved that their intimidation tactics wouldn't work in the face of the law. As we left the courtroom, Harrison blocked my path in the hallway. His lawyers tried to pull him away, but he shook them off. You will regret this, he hissed, his voice low and menacing. You have no idea who you're starting a war with. I looked him directly in the eye, my lifelong fear of him gone, replaced by something cold and hard. No, father, I said. You're the one who has no idea who you're at war with. The courtroom defeat didn't deter Harrison. It just made him change battlefields. If he couldn't beat me with the law, he would try to ruin me through other means. The attack shifted from the courthouse to my career. I was a lead software developer at CyberForge, a top cybersecurity firm in Silicon Valley. I loved my job. It was a world of logic, order, and elegant design, all the things missing from my family life. I had built my reputation on competence and hard work, and I was about to lead a major project, the development of a next-generation encryption platform for the financial sector. The first call came from my CEO, David Chen. Elara? He began, his tone uncharacteristically strained. I just had a very strange call from Harrison Hayes. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. Oh, he's an investor in one of our VC funds, he said. A minor one, but influential nonetheless. He expressed concerns about you. What kind of concerns, David? I asked, keeping my voice even. He spoke of instability and erratic behavior. He implied you were having a personal crisis that could affect your judgment, especially on a project as sensitive as this encryption platform. David hesitated. He all but said you were a security risk. Rage flared in me, hot and fierce. This was a low blow. He wasn't just trying to discredit me with my boss. He was trying to turn my greatest strength, my technical skill and attention to detail, into a liability. David, I said, my voice calm and deliberate. What my father is doing is part of a personal vendetta related to an unrelated family dispute. He is weaponizing his business contacts to pressure me. My conduct at CyberForge has always been exemplary, and my work speaks for itself. This is an attack on my professional integrity, and it is completely baseless. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. David was a good man, but he was also a pragmatic CEO. He had to consider the company's interests. I believe you, Elara, he said finally, but you have to understand my position. The board will hear about this. We need to be beyond reproach. I'm going to have to add some oversight to the project, more checks and balances. I felt a chill. He had succeeded. He hadn't gotten me fired, but he had planted a seed of doubt. He had tainted my sanctuary. Every email I sent, every line of code I wrote would now be under a microscope. Beatrice, meanwhile, had found a new way to inflict pain. She began erasing me from the family history. She scrubbed every photo of me from her social media accounts, replacing them with old pictures of her Harrison and Griffin, the perfect trio. When a family friend asked in the comments, "Where's Elara?" Beatrice had replied publicly, "Elara is focusing on herself right now. We wish her all the best." It was insidious and effective. She was turning me into a pariah, the daughter who had written herself out of the family's loving embrace. She was rewriting the narrative in real time, and her friends who only saw the glossy surface accepted it without question. But the cruelest blow came from an unexpected source. I had gone to visit my grandmother, who was in a high-end nursing facility in Santa Barbara. She suffered from mild cognitive decline, but on her good days, she was still sharp as a tack. She was the only one in the family who had ever truly seen me. It was she who had insisted on leaving me half of the estate. I found her sitting on her balcony looking out at the Pacific, but as I approached, a nurse stopped me. "I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes," the nurse said, her expression apologetic, "but we have instructions you're not on the approved visitor list." "What?" I was stunned. "I'm her granddaughter. I've always been on the list." "Mr. Harrison Hayes called this morning," the nurse explained gently. "He's the healthcare proxy. He changed the list. Only he, his wife, and his son are permitted." It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. This wasn't about money or business. This was pure cruelty. They were cutting me off from the one person in the family I truly loved. They were using her vulnerable health status as a weapon against me. I stepped back, feeling dizzy. I could have made a scene. I could have called Julian and started another legal battle over visitation rights. But I looked past the nurse and saw my grandmother looking so small and frail in her chair. A stressful fight would only cause her distress. Hot tears pricked my eyes, but I fought them back. I would not let them see me cry. "Please," I said to the nurse, my voice trembling slightly, "can you just tell her I was here? Tell her Elara sends her love." The nurse nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. As I drove back up the highway, the rage and grief swirled together into a single potent emotion. They had gone too far. They had crossed a line. I had tried to keep this fight clean based on legal and business principles, but they had made it dirty. Fine. I could play dirty too. When I got back to my apartment, I opened that encrypted file again, the one filled with Griffin's discretions and Beatrice's expenses, but I scrolled past them. They were small weapons. I needed a nuclear bomb, and I knew where it was buried. I started digging into Harrison's records. Specifically, the deals related to a desert development project near Palm Springs, one he had acquired for a song a few years back. Something had always felt off about it. Now I had the time and the motivation to find out what. I spent the entire night combing through LLC filings, tax records, and complex contracts, and then at 3 a.m. I found it. A series of clumsily hidden payments to a shell consulting firm, a firm that could be traced back to a city councilman who had voted to rezone that very land in a favourable way. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. It was bribery. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. This was my trump card. The one thing that could not only destroy Harrison's reputation, but could potentially land him in prison. I felt no elation. Just a cold, heavy certainty. He had turned me into someone I never wanted to be, a person willing to destroy her family to defend herself. But when I thought of my grandmother's face, isolated and used as a pawn, I knew I had no other choice. I copied the files to an encrypted thumb drive. I wouldn't use it immediately, but I would have it ready. The game had changed again. This was no longer about money or respect. This was about survival. The discovery of Harrison's bribery felt like holding a live grenade. The weight of it was immense, and the silence in my apartment seemed to be filled with its inaudible ticking. I didn't tell Jordan or Julian about it. This was a card too dangerous to share even with my own lawyers. It wasn't a legal tool, it was a tool of annihilation. Meanwhile, the pressure at Cyberforge was relentless. The oversight David had promised turned out to be suffocating micromanagement. Every decision I made was questioned, every line of code reviewed by a committee. Colleagues who once sought my advice now kept their distance, unsure of my standing. I was like a patient in quarantine, suspected of carrying a contagious disease. Harrison's doubt had become a virus infecting my professional life. But it was Griffin's collapse that created the first real crack in the Hayes family fortress. Cut off from his endless supply of cash, reality hit Griffin hard. His BMW was repossessed. He was evicted from his luxury apartment in Marina del Rey. According to a mutual acquaintance, he was crashing on an old friend's sofa, his ego as shattered as the fragments of his former life. Desperation drove him to do the unthinkable. He called me from a burner phone, knowing I had blocked his number. "Elara, please don't hang up," he said immediately, his voice hoarse and tired. I need help. Not money, well money, but not how you think." I stayed silent, waiting. "I went to a financial advisor," he said, the words sounding alien coming from his mouth. "The kind you suggested. She said I have zero life skills. She showed me my credit card statements for the last 5 years. Did you know, Elara, I spent over $20,000 on valet parking alone?" He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I didn't even know. The money just came, and then it was gone." "That's a good first step, Griffin," I said cautiously. "No, it's not," he said, his voice breaking. "It's a disaster. She says I'm over $100,000 in consumer debt, not to mention the student loans Mum and Dad were supposed to have paid off. They stopped the payments. Everything is collapsing, Elara. Mom and Dad. They won't listen. They're just angry at you. Mum says I need to man up. Dad says this is a character-building lesson. They don't get it. I don't know what to do." For the first time in my life, I heard genuine fear in my brother's voice. Not annoyance or inconvenience, but the abject terror of someone who realizes they are in freefall with no safety net. "There's one thing, Beatrice, I can do," I said, an idea forming in my mind, cold and strategic. "But you'll have to do exactly as I say." 2 days later, an email was sent from Griffin's account to Harrison and Beatrice, with a copy sent to both their lawyer and mine. Subject statement regarding the finances of Griffin, Elara Hayes. The email, which I had drafted and Griffin had agreed to, was a detailed and brutal financial confession. It listed every debt, every maxed-out credit card, and his state of near insolvency. But it went further. It also included a sworn affidavit signed and notarized, in which Griffin stated that for years I had managed his finances responsibly and had repeatedly warned him about his spending habits, but that those warnings had been ignored not just by him, but by his parents, who had continually enabled him with funds against my advice. It ended with a single sentence: "Full responsibility for my current financial situation rests with me and with the lack of oversight from our parents. Elara Hayes has acted with integrity and competence in all matters, and any suggestion to the contrary is false." It was a bombshell. It completely destroyed the narrative Harrison and Beatrice were trying to build of me as an unstable financial saboteur. It turned their golden heir into the key witness for my defense. Their reaction was volcanic. Beatrice called Griffin, screaming and crying, accusing him of betraying the family. Harrison, as Griffin later recounted, met with him and threatened to disown him completely. But something in Griffin had snapped. Pushed to the brink, he had found a sliver of a spine. "You already disowned me, Dad," he'd told him. "You just hadn't sent the official memo." For me, Griffin's affidavit was a major victory. It forced Harrison's legal team to retract their worst accusations of financial misconduct. It also drove a deep wedge within their camp, turning them against each other. But I knew it wasn't enough. Harrison was still too powerful, too arrogant. He would write Griffin off as collateral damage and continue the fight. I needed to do something with my trump card. But to release it publicly would mean mutual destruction. I needed a way to use it without detonating it. The idea came to me late one night while watching an old spy movie. not a frontal assault. A quiet warning, a message that only one person could understand. I used an anonymous email service and a chain of proxy servers to hide my tracks. I composed a simple email. It had no sender, no subject line. It was sent to a single recipient, Harrison's personal lawyer, an old man named Samuel Black, who had been on my father's payroll for 40 years. The body of the email contained only a single line: ask Harrison about the Desert Bloom consulting firm and the 2018 Palm Springs rezoning vote. I hit send. The grenade was no longer in my hands. It had been gently rolled across the room where it came to a stop directly under Harrison's desk, and now we would all wait to see if he was smart enough not to step on it. After sending the anonymous email, a strange quiet descended. It was different from the silence that had come before. This was not the calm before a new attack, but the tense stillness of a predator that realizes it has just stepped into a trap. For 3 days, nothing happened. No furious emails from Harrison's lawyers. No surprise ambushes from Beatrice. Even the pressure at Cyberforge seemed to ease slightly. It was as if someone had hit a pause button on the war. I knew my message had been received. Harrison and his lawyer, Samuel Black, were assessing the potential damage. They were looking down at the grenade at their feet and weighing their options. During this lull, something unexpected happened. Jordan called me, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Elara, you are not going to believe this," he said. "David Chen from Cyberforge just called me, in my capacity as your lawyer." "What? Why?" "Harrison has withdrawn his concerns. More than that, he's divested his entire stake in that venture capital fund. David said Harrison called him personally, said there had been a regrettable family misunderstanding and that he had complete faith in your competence and integrity. David sends his profound apologies for putting you under pressure. The encryption project, it's all yours, no oversight." I sat down, feeling slightly lightheaded. It was the first move. Harrison was retreating from one of the fronts. He knew that a bribery investigation would not only destroy him, but would create a scandal that could taint every company he was associated with. He was trying to contain the fallout. The second sign came a few days later. I received an email from the nursing facility in Santa Barbara. It was a brief administrative note from the director. "Dear Ms. Hayes, this is to inform you that your name has been reinstated to the approved visitor list for Mrs. Eleanor Vance. We apologize for any inconvenience this recent administrative oversight may have caused." Administrative oversight? A blatant lie, but the message was clear. Harrison was conceding. He was giving me back my grandmother. It was an olive branch offered under duress. That weekend, I drove down to Santa Barbara. The reunion with my grandmother was sweet and painful. Her memory was spotty, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Elara, dear," she said, taking my hand, "I've missed you. There were men in suits here. They said you were busy." "I wasn't busy, Grandma," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm never too busy for you." We sat together for hours talking about small things. She didn't understand the complexities of the war I was fighting, but she understood the tension in me. "You look tired, dear," she said, stroking my hair. "Remember, you're stronger than your father. His strength is in making noise. Yours is in silence." Her words, perhaps by chance, were devastatingly accurate. As I drove home, I knew the balance of power had fundamentally shifted. I hadn't needed to detonate the bomb. Just letting Harrison know I had it was enough. He was paralyzed by the fear of mutually assured destruction. Now it was time to press my advantage. I instructed Julian Croft to send a new settlement offer. It was simple and non-negotiable. Immediate sale of the Napa estate. The sale would be overseen by a neutral third party, with proceeds to be divided strictly according to the terms of my grandmother's will. A mutual non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement binding on all parties. This would stop Beatrice's smear campaign in its tracks, the establishment of an irrevocable trust for my grandmother's future healthcare costs to be funded from the estate sale proceeds before the remainder was divided. This would guarantee her care and remove Harrison's control over visitation as a weapon, a full and final division of all remaining joint financial assets, including a final payment to me for past financial management services calculated at standard industry rates. It was a demand for unconditional surrender cloaked in legal language. Their response was telling. Instead of a blustering email from Latham and Watkins, Samuel Black Harrison's personal lawyer called Julian directly. It was a significant change in protocol. The corporate lawyers had been sidelined. This was personal now. "Mr. Black wants a meeting," Julian told me after the call. "Just him and Harrison. Just you and me. No one else. He said it's time to talk sense." The meeting was set for the following Wednesday at a neutral office space in Century City. As I prepared for that meeting, Griffin checked in again. He'd found a low-level job at a logistics company. He was living in a small studio apartment in the San Fernando Valley. "It's awful," he said on the phone, but for the first time there was a hint of humour in his voice. "I have to do my own laundry. Do you know how a washing machine works? It's like rocket science." He paused. "Hey, thank you for not giving me the money. I think I'm starting to get it." "You're doing great, Griffin," I said, and I meant it. "Whatever happens in that meeting," he said, his voice turning serious, "don't back down, Elara. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for anyone. Finish it." His words solidified my resolve. When I walked into that conference room that day, I felt a cold calm. Harrison and Samuel Black were already there. My father looked 10 years older. His swagger was gone, replaced by a wary exhaustion. The look he gave me was no longer one of anger, but of a bitter, grudging reassessment. He was no longer seeing an unstable daughter. He was seeing the opponent who had cornered him, and we both knew I had a weapon he couldn't defend against. The conference room was sterile, designed to strip away emotion. A long mahogany table, black leather chairs, a carafe of water, and glass tumblers. The air was thick with the unsaid, heavier than any accusation that could be uttered. Harrison sat across from me, Samuel Black at his side, like a loyal shadow. My father had lost his customary arrogance. Instead, he sat ramrod straight, a stiffness that bespoke taut control. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw not anger, but something akin to bitter astonishment, as if he were seeing a stranger. Julian Croft, my lawyer, opened the meeting with polite, legalistic language, laying out the terms of our settlement offer. Samuel Black listened intently, nodding occasionally. Harrison remained silent, his eyes fixed on me. When Julian finished, Black cleared his throat. "We have reviewed Ms. Hayes's offer," he said, his voice even and non-expressive. "In principle, we find it to be a basis for a resolution." It was a massive concession, artfully understated. "However," Black continued, "there are a few points of clarification, specifically the payment for past services. Mr. Hayes feels that as a family member—" "No," I cut in my voice, quiet but firm. It was the first time I had spoken. All four men turned to look at me. "There is no clarification. For 10 years, I performed the duties of a chief financial officer. I managed assets, optimized taxes, and protected the family from ill-advised decisions. I did it without pay and without appreciation. That fee is not a point of negotiation, it is an invoice." A silence fell over the room. Julian gave a slight approving nod. Harrison's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching. "You always were calculating," he said, his voice low and bitter. "I learned from the best," I replied coolly. Samuel Black quickly interjected, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "On the matter of the Napa estate, we agree to the sale, and the establishment of a trust for Mrs. Vance is a prudent idea." They were conceding the major points quickly. They wanted this over. The fear of what I knew was a powerful catalyst. The negotiation dragged on for another hour, but it was effectively over. They weakly contested a few minor details, timelines, the choice of brokerage firm, but it was just for show. They agreed to every one of my core demands. As the meeting concluded, Samuel Black and Julian Croft shook hands and began packing their briefcases, discussing the technicalities of drafting the final agreement. For a moment, it was just Harrison and me left at the table. "You got what you wanted," he said, the menace gone from his voice, replaced by an empty weariness. "I hope you're satisfied." "This wasn't about satisfaction, Father," I said, using the word for the first time. It felt foreign on my tongue. "This was about consequence. You taught me that in business every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This is the reaction." He looked at me, and for a second the facade crumbled. I saw an old man, cornered and defeated, who had catastrophically misjudged his opponent. "Your mother," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "She'll never understand this. She'll never forgive you. She'll never forgive me for not allowing her to continue disrespecting me," I corrected. "There's a difference." I stood up, feeling a cold finality. There was no sense of victory, just a profound sadness for what had been lost, or perhaps for what had never really been there. "One more thing," I said, looking directly at him. "Leave Griffin alone. He's trying to get on his own 2 feet. Don't interfere. Don't try to pull him back in. Just let him be." He didn't answer. He just stared at the polished mahogany of the table. I turned and walked out of the room, and I did not look back. The agreement was signed the following week. The Napa estate went on the market and sold within a month for a staggering price. My grandmother's trust was established, securing her care forever, and my visitation rights in legal text. A large sum of money was wired into my new, entirely separate bank account. I used a portion of it to help Griffin anonymously, not as a handout. I set up a small trust managed by a third party that would match his earnings dollar for dollar on the condition that he continue with his financial counselling. It was a safety net, not a hammock, a way to help him build, not to cradle him. I never spoke directly to my parents again. All necessary communication went through lawyers. Beatrice held to the non-disparagement agreement, but her silence on social media spoke volumes. The perfect Hayes family had vanished. A few months later, I got a call from Griffin. "I know it was you," he said. "The trust fund. Thank you, Elara. Really. Use it wisely, Griffin," I said. "I'm trying," he replied. "Hey, you want to get coffee sometime? Just us, like normal people." I smiled a real, genuine smile for the first time in months. I'd like that very much. That night, I sat on the balcony of my penthouse, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had exposed the truth of it. I had forced everyone to face the consequences of their choices. The bomb of Harrison's bribery remained dormant on my encrypted drive, never to be used. The real power I had come to realize wasn't in detonating it, but in knowing you could and choosing not to. I hadn't won a war. I had escaped a prison, and for the first time the future stretched out before me, not as a path defined by others' expectations, but as a quiet, open space entirely my own. A year later, the air in San Francisco smelled different. It was no longer thick with the unspoken battles, but crisp with Pacific salt spray and the promise of a new day. My life had settled into a new rhythm, one of my own making. The coffee with Griffin became a monthly ritual. We met at a quiet little place in Sausalito, far from the ghosts of Beverly Hills. He was changed. The counterfeit swagger had been replaced by a quiet humility. He talked about his job, the challenges of budgeting, and the Debtors Anonymous meetings he attended. "The weirdest thing is," he said during one meeting, stirring sugar into his latte, "for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm actually earning something. I got a raise last week. It was tiny, but it was mine." We didn't talk much about our parents. There was no need. They existed in our past, like a storm that had passed, the wreckage still visible, but the destructive force gone. Griffin said he spoke to Beatrice occasionally, short-strained calls, where she mostly complained about ingratitude and humiliation. He hadn't spoken to Harrison since that final meeting. "I think he's afraid of me," Griffin said, a startling observation. "Not me, but what I represent, a failure, living proof that his system didn't work." I spent my weekends in Santa Barbara with my grandmother, with the trust ensuring the best possible care. Her health had stabilized. Her good days outnumbered the bad. We would sit for hours reading, doing crosswords, and watching the waves. I told her about my work at Cyberforge, about the encryption platform my team had just successfully launched. "I always knew you were the smart one," she'd say, patting my hand. "Your father has money, but you have the brains. Brains always win in the end." My newfound wealth didn't change my life dramatically. I still lived in the same apartment, I still drove the same car, but it afforded me a different kind of freedom, the freedom to invest in what mattered to me. I established a scholarship in my grandmother's name, Eleanor Vance, at Stanford, specifically for young women in computer science. I joined the board of a non-profit that provided financial literacy education to underprivileged youth. I was using my money and my skills not to maintain an illusion, but to create tangible change. One afternoon, I received an unexpected email. It was from Vanessa Dubois, Griffin's ex-wife, whom I had always liked. "Dear Elara," it read, "I know it's been a long time. I heard about, well, everything, and I just wanted to say I'm so proud of you. I always knew you had that strength in you. Griffin seems to be doing so much better. Maybe someday when the dust has settled, we can get lunch." The email meant more to me than any check could have. It was validation from someone who had witnessed my family's dysfunction from a front row seat. But healing isn't a straight line. There were days the old ghosts returned. I'd see a woman who looked like Beatrice in a store and feel my heart clench. I'd hear a voice like Harrison's in a meeting and feel a familiar chill. The scars were still there. In a therapy session, I talked about this. "I feel like I'll never be completely free of them," I admitted. "Maybe the goal isn't to be free," my therapist said. "Maybe the goal is to learn how to carry your story without letting it carry you. You aren't erasing your past, Elara. You're integrating it. You're reclaiming the narrative and deciding how it ends." Her words stayed with me. That fall, I did something for myself. I bought a small house. It wasn't in Beverly Hills or Napa. It was on a cliff overlooking the ocean in Big Sur, a small wood and glass structure surrounded by cypress trees and silence. It had a study with a panoramic view of the Pacific and built-in bookshelves. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could hear my own voice, no longer drowned out by the shouts of expectation or the whispers of condescension. One evening I was sitting on the deck watching the sun sink below the horizon in a fiery streak of orange and purple. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I normally wouldn't answer, but something compelled me. "Hello, Elara." The voice was hesitant and uncertain. I recognized it instantly. "Beatrice." A long silence stretched. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. She started, then stopped. "I just wanted to know if you are well." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But in her voice for the first time, I didn't hear arrogance or demand. I heard something else, an emptiness, a loss. I took a deep breath, feeling the salt air fill my lungs. I felt no anger anymore, just a distant sadness. "I am very well, Mother," I said, and it was the truth. I am truly very well. The call from Beatrice did not open a door to reconciliation. It was more like a final echo from a world I no longer inhabited. I was polite, distant, and the conversation was over in under a minute. No apology was offered, no acknowledgement of the pain caused, just a single question wrapped in years of estrangement. She didn't ask about my life, my work, or my new home. She just needed to know I was well. A way of reassuring herself that her world, however diminished, was still intact. Some people, I realized, cannot change. Their narrative is carved in stone, and they will spend the rest of their lives defending it no matter how flawed. Harrison and Beatrice would always be the victims in their version of the story, devoted parents betrayed by an ungrateful, difficult daughter. Accepting that was no longer painful, it was simply a fact. The following spring, I attended the first graduation ceremony for the Eleanor Vance Scholarship Fund. I sat in the audience listening as a brilliant young woman named Maya, who had grown up in a low-income immigrant family, spoke about how the scholarship had changed her life. "It wasn't just about the money," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It was about having someone believe in you, to know that a woman I never met, Eleanor Vance, and her granddaughter saw potential in girls like me." As she finished, I applauded, silent tears tracing paths down my cheeks. This was my legacy. Not a name on an office building or an estate in Napa, but this, a chain of opportunity passed from one generation to the next. Griffin was there with me. He wore a well-fitting suit, looking professional and genuinely confident. After the event, we walked through the Stanford campus, the same grounds I had arrived at alone so many years before. "You know this is crazy," he said, looking around at the sandstone buildings. "When you came here, I was so jealous. I told everyone it was boring and nerdy, but really I was furious that you had something I didn't. Not the brains, the purpose." "You're finding your purpose, Griffin," I told him. "I'm trying," he replied. One day at a time. He had been promoted to a supervisor position at the logistics company. He was dating someone. His life was smaller and more ordinary than it had been, but it was his. Our relationship had found a new equilibrium. We were not best friends, bound by shared secrets. We were two survivors, each with our own scars, learning to redefine family on our own terms. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to, but who you choose to continue the journey with, even after the shipwreck. That summer, I was working on my deck in Big Sur, the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below as my soundtrack when a news alert popped up on my screen. Real estate developer Elara Hayes under investigation for rezoning irregularities. My heart stopped for a beat. The article was vague, citing anonymous sources and an ongoing district attorney's investigation into land deals in Palm Springs. I knew instantly what had happened. My bomb, the one I had chosen not to detonate, had somehow gone off on its own. Perhaps an investigative journalist had found the same trail. Perhaps a business rival Harrison had double-crossed, decided to get revenge. Or perhaps simply the truth has a way of finding its way to the light. I read the article, but I felt no glee or vindication, just a profound sense of distance. It was the story of another man in another life. His empire, built on intimidation and backroom deals, was finally facing its own reckoning. I closed my laptop. I went inside, made a cup of tea, and returned to the deck. I looked out at the ocean, vast, endless, and indifferent. The call from Beatrice came as I knew it would. "You did this!" she shrieked, the hysteria back in full force. "This is your fault! You've ruined us." I listened for a moment, her screaming mingling with the sound of the waves, and then I did what I should have done years ago. I said, "Goodbye, Beatrice," and gently hung up the phone. Then I blocked her number. I didn't follow the ensuing scandal closely. I saw the headlines: Harrison resigns as CEO, Hayes Properties forced to sell off assets to pay fines and legal fees. The Beverly Hills power couple vanishes from the social pages. One evening, Griffin called me. "Dad took a plea deal," he said. "No jail time, but they've lost almost everything." His voice was subdued. "Mum is selling her jewelry." "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he answered after a moment. "It's weird, but yeah, it's like gravity is finally working. Things are finally landing where they're supposed to." He was right. Years later, when I was an established and respected leader in the tech industry, a mentor to young women and a woman content in her own silence and space, I would sometimes think about that fateful brunch. I thought of Beatrice's words, "You're lucky we still let you join us. Pity has its limits." She had been right in a way she could never comprehend. Their pity had been a prison, and being cast out of it was the greatest liberation of my life. They thought they were exiling me, but really they were handing me the key. Not all fairy tales end with a family reunited. Some end with a person finding herself, and that is a much happier ending indeed.